2 days after the crucifixion, a small group of women moved through the rocky landscape outside of Jerusalem. They were coming to perform the final burial rites for a man they had seen die in agony. The story was supposed to be over, but when they reached the site, the massive stone sealing the entrance had been moved. They looked inside and found the tomb completely empty. This moment is the bedrock of the Christian faith, but modern skeptics often view it through a different lens, arguing that the empty tomb is a late-stage pious myth, or a legend that developed long after the fact. That raises a specific question. If we treat the empty tomb not as a religious text, but purely as a historical claim, how does it stand up to the neutral scrutiny of the modern historian? To find an answer, we have to look past religious bias. By examining the surviving data from the 1st century, we can reach a logical verdict about what actually happened that Sunday morning. Reconstructing the event begins with the geographic and historical setting of ancient Judea. The claim is not an isolated report. We have 4 independent gospel accounts that all attest to the same core finding. Critics often suggest these accounts are late legends, but scholars have traced the pre-Markan Passion narrative back to within 7 years of the crucifixion. This tight window suggests a very short time frame for legendary distortion to have taken root. This leads historians to examine the specific identity of the first witnesses reported in that narrative, the women. In 1st century Judeo-Greco-Roman culture, the legal testimony of women was widely disregarded. They were generally not considered credible witnesses in a formal setting. If the early church was inventing a triumphant myth to convince the ancient world, they would have likely written prominent male figures into the role of the first witnesses. The fact that they included a socially embarrassing detail, that women were the primary witnesses, strongly indicates that the writers were preserving an authentic historical memory rather than fabricating a legend. The location of this preaching is just as critical. The apostles didn't travel to a distant province to begin their work. They started in the heart of Jerusalem. This creates what historians call the Jerusalem factor. The Roman and Jewish authorities could have crushed the movement in a single afternoon by simply producing the body. Instead, the record shows a profound silence from the authorities. No body was ever produced to end the uprising. The earliest recorded Jewish counter-polemic appears in the Gospel of Matthew, which notes the accusation that the disciples stole the body under the cover of night. This accusation focuses the debate on why the body was gone, rather than whether it was gone at all. It represents a significant historical concession. Modern secular scholarship often echoes this point. The Jewish scholar Geza Vermes noted the women found not a body, but an empty tomb, while critical scholar Dale Allison concludes that the evidence for an empty grave is historically stronger than the evidence against it. When both the fiercest ancient critics and modern secular historians converge on this one data point, the empty tomb moves beyond the realm of simple religious preference. Testing the remaining naturalistic explanations against the data lets us see how they hold up under stress. The wrong tomb theory fails immediately. If the disciples had simply lost their way, authorities would have easily corrected the error by pointing to the correct grave. Then there is the relocation theory, the idea that Joseph of Arimathea moved the body to a common graveyard for criminals. This hypothesis lacks historical documentation and fails to explain why the disciples would face execution for their belief in a living Savior. When subjected to rigorous historical testing, these naturalistic explanations struggle to account for the evidence, leaving the question of the empty tomb fundamentally unresolved by common logic. Looking at the aggregate journey, the early dating, the embarrassing witnesses, and the failure of alternative theories, the historian is left with a tomb that was undeniably empty. This convergence of data brings the analytical method to the very edge of the miraculous. The evidence points to the exact explanation the Church has faithfully proclaimed since that first Sunday. Despite 2 millennia of investigation, the documented absence of a body remains the central, unyielding fact of the record. The historical search concludes at an open entrance, leaving the viewer with the same choice the first witnesses faced on that morning.